Uh, it is my pleasure to welcome Erika Noerenberg. Erika is a security researcher specializing in digital forensics, malware analysis, and software development. Her talk, Pentesting the Self, Hacking Failure for Success, will discuss how we can pick ourselves back up from failure and learn from our mistakes.
All right, thanks, Matt. I'm gonna hopefully present here and hope that everything works out. So I wanted to talk about my own failures and how I've overcome them over this last year. It's definitely been quite an experience. I hope not to take the full amount of time because I don't think you guys want to hear me ramble on about failure for that long, but for a full hour or 45 minutes. But I do want to share some of my experiences, how they kind of came about and how I kind of dug myself back up and picked myself back up out of the dirt, basically. And hopefully share with you some things that I learned that maybe could help you guys also in the future. Because I know that all of us have been through this in some degree. So I wasn't going to do one of these who am I's, but I figured that a lot of you guys maybe don't know me. I'm very easy to find if you Google my name, Erika Noerenberg. I am literally the only Erika Noerenberg in the United States, so you can find anything, any of my talks or any of that through even Google. But basically, as Matt said, I'm a senior threat researcher. Most recently, I worked at VMware Carbon Black Tau, which is our threat analysis unit. I worked with one of the guys on my team was Greg Foss. He's also presenting today, I think at 10:30 or so, or 11:30, and as well as Turi Reardon and Adon, who are speaking later today. I've spent many years in the community, in the security industry, mostly doing malware analysis, reverse engineering, digital forensics, some development, iOS development, basic tooling, things like that. My Twitter is Gutterchurl, and I have to give the disclaimer that I am not a life coach by any means or any sort of motivational speaker. I have gotten some inspiration from people like that over this past 10 months now, but that's definitely not in my job description. So one of the people that I got introduced to was actually through my sister, who shared a podcast with me. And was from Brene Brown, who's a vulnerability researcher. I had no idea who she was. And you guys may have seen the movie, I think it's a Netflix movie, Wine Country. She actually is featured in there during one of the scenes. That was the first time I'd seen her, but I didn't even know who she was. I thought it was just a made-up character. But when I listened to the podcast and saw the movie again, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. But anyway, this podcast really inspired me because it was during the time when I had just been asked to do this talk. And she started out with a quote that I think is really rang true with me, because it really represented something that I'd struggled with for a long time and really internalizing things and criticism from people. And so it really spoke to me. This quote is actually from Theodore Roosevelt, but she quotes it in several of her books and podcasts and different appearances. So I want to read it. I know it's long, but I will kind of give a summary, but I really feel like it's important to kind of really listen to these words, and it's a very meaningful quote to me that I've looked back on over the past year. So the quote says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out the strong man's stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Like I said, this is a lot to process in one sentence, basically, but it really is important, an important message that you really need to remind yourself that you're the one down in the arena fighting. Some of us for detections, threat hunting, anything like that. And when I first started all of this, and my sister shared me this podcast, I was like, oh God, another, self-help tape or whatever. I grew up with my mom and my parents having to listen to this stuff. My mom had all the books, the Tony Robbins and all these things, and sitting on a 14-hour car ride to Minnesota or to Kansas, having to listen to these motivational speakers and self-help people telling us how to live our lives. And I absolutely never thought that I would actually get into this, but there are a lot of people out there that have some really great information to share. But that quote was a lot. So basically, just to summarize it, just don't listen to someone whose opinion isn't worth your consideration. And you have to really think about the people in your life whose opinions matter. Some of those are the people that are down in the trenches, your coworkers, the coworkers that you trust and love. My team on TAO and ThreatSite, they were fantastic resources, people to lean on. We were a very tight team. These people, their opinions matter. My family, those people, the people that love you, the people who know you, the people who know your work, these are the people whose opinions matter. And one of the things actually after the quote that Brene Brown stated, she said she actually keeps an index card in her wallet to remind herself when some critic says something, the thing that we always tell ourselves in this community is you don't read the comments, because there are so many people that are going to attack you for, reasons having nothing to do with your work or anything like that. But those opinions don't matter. You have to focus on the people whose opinions are worth your time and attention. Why are you going to let somebody who doesn't know you at all, who says, oh, you looked really fat on stage when you're giving that talk? These people shouldn't make you feel inferior, or, you got this one detail wrong in this talk, and obviously you don't know what you're talking about. Well, you can't let these people's opinions take you down. And I know that's better said than done, or easier said than done, but it's an important thing to keep in mind and to remind yourself. So I'm going to talk about the F word. Okay, so we're not going to start with failure. I figure that's probably what you assumed, but we'll get to that soon. So the first F word that I want to talk about is fear. So fear is often a precursor to failure. The fear of failure itself is often worse than failing at something that you try. So if you try something and maybe it's a shot, a moonshot, and you fail, that's one thing. But if you're so afraid of failing at that thing that you never do it, you're either going to, if it's something that's been assigned to you and you're forced to do it, you're going to either procrastinate, or if you have this moonshot idea and you don't go after it because you're afraid of failing, that's a loss of opportunity. If you had succeeded, maybe this wonderful thing could have happened in your life or your career. And the other way is something that I struggle with is perfectionism. If you have such high standards that you get this assignment and maybe you're not quite qualified, or you don't feel like you're completely qualified for this task, you hold yourself to such high standards that you feel like you can never actually finish it and produce something that's up to your standards. And so instead of producing something that's the best that you can do with what you have, you don't produce anything at all. And sometimes this is more detrimental than anything else because you have let somebody down now. That leads into, a shame spiral. This can, snowball into an effect, right? So you can either lose opportunity, lose respect for yourself, or just make yourself feel inferior. So there's one other F word that I want to talk about. Fine. So this actually I took from a motivational speaker, life coach person named Mel Robbins. I happened to see a TEDx talk of hers in San Francisco that was called "How to Stop Screwing Yourself Over." It was really good. But basically the point is that just fine is not okay. If you're fine, if somebody asks you, how are you doing? I'm fine. A lot of times this is indication that you're dissatisfied with something in your life. It can also mean that there are things going wrong, but you don't want to show weakness or vulnerability. You want to keep people at arm's length because that's safer. You don't want to show, and this comes back to the perfectionism as well. I know a lot of us in this industry suffer from feeling like you have to be perfect all the time and in constant fear of publishing something with maybe some wrong details, or maybe that function that you reversed was you interpreted it wrong, or maybe you got the wrong attribution, or any number of things that can go wrong. And these things, for people, you hold yourself to a higher standard than most people who are looking at your work are holding you to. So perfectionism to me may as well be an F word, but that kind of gets off the subject. But that was something that I wanted to mention as well. So last but not least, failure. So that's what we wanted to talk about. I'm going to share a very personal story of how I failed harder than I ever thought was possible, and how I managed to pick myself back up and recover. But from the deepest depths of down in a hole. I mean, and it's been, a year and a half, basically. I'm hoping that, even though this is really hard to talk about publicly, I'm hoping that doing this will help some of you come to grips with some of the things that you've been feeling, and maybe feeling like a failure, or being too hard on yourself. And by sharing my experiences, you can come away with some information that maybe would help in your own struggles, or at least give you maybe the courage to reach out to somebody or make some new connections, learn to lean on some other people for help. It's very hard to do that. And about a week ago, I did post a Twitter thread, which I'm sure you've seen if you've been following BSides Boulder, because I've retweeted it like 6 times. But I really, really feel like it's important for us all to share our own experiences of failure and learn to be more vulnerable and talk about these things. Like I said before, the Twitter community, especially in InfoSec, has had much more of an emphasis on people coming out and talking honestly about mental health issues, their own struggles, and I really want to keep that conversation going. So I hope that this talk also inspires some of you to share your own experiences and learn from those other people, and maybe connect with some people that post to the thread. Maybe there's somebody that really speaks to you and has common experiences that you want to connect with, and maybe become friends. So let's talk about failure and what it actually means. So if you're familiar with the show Silicon Valley, you probably know this scene. Basically, Gavin Belson, the guy pictured here, is a CEO of a huge company in Silicon Valley, and he has a product that he made a huge, ambitious launch to basically broadcast using his technology to a UFC fight to the entire world, and had total trust in this technology. What he didn't know was that his engineering team, responsible for all the features that were going into this product, all the way down the line from the very first, very lowest level of engineering, they were weeks behind or months behind. But each leader going up the chain was unwilling to pass that information on to the next person. They basically passed the buck. They said, we're weeks behind. And they said, you need to tell this person. They're like, we're not telling that person. So on and on up the chain, each of these features turns out to be months behind, and the product is nowhere near ready. And so when they launch the product and try to broadcast this UFC fight, it fails horribly. It's absolutely miserable. And so Gavin, as the CEO, has to go before the board of directors and explain himself to avoid being deposed as the CEO. So instead of explaining why the product failed and how they're going to overcome it, or trying to make excuses, he actually argued that failure is a necessary evil and a stepping stone. And he cites the failures of eventual successful entrepreneurs such as Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and their initial failed attempts, that now, because of those, they have iterated and become successful. And he states that in tech, failure is actually pre-greatness. I'm not sure I really share his confidence in that, but I can share my own experiences and how it helped me to grow personally and realize my career goals. So here's where I start the more personal account of how this happened, and hopefully can share some knowledge with you that's helpful. Basically, it started in 2019. I started getting into malware analysis, which I'd had some experiences with off and on over the last 10 years, but not a lot, nothing in depth. I'm not a great researcher like Patrick Wardle or my former coworker, Scott Knight, people like these. But there was a gap there, and somebody needed to do it, because it was clear that we had a gap in analyzing these threats and visibility into these threats, and somebody needed to take it on. So I decided to take this on because it actually started with, well, let's go back. So basically the idea is I submitted for several conferences in 2019 and wasn't expecting to get accepted to them all, but I ended up being accepted, and I have a problem saying no. So I committed to way more travel and conferences than I was prepared for. So some of these conferences, back to back to back, were also commingled with our work travel. Every quarter, basically, quarterly, we met up in Boston with our team to do quarterly planning. And so during 2019, between the conference travel and the work travel, I was barely home. There were house projects. We have a house that, it's not exceptionally old, but there were a lot of things that need to be redone. And we started a lot of house projects that we could not finish, just because we were out of town all the time. Not only that, but our farm, as my husband Tracy likes to call it, we have 2 cats, had 4 chickens at the time, and a part-time dog, Tracy's daughter's dog. They lost some attention, even though Ashley takes great care of them. She also works during the day. So the dog especially, she's elderly and she likes people to be home during the day. So, but in June, basically, was both the crowning moment and also the start of the acceleration of the downfall. So I spoke at the second Objective by the Sea conference. If you're not familiar with the Objective by the Sea conference, it's specifically Mac security focused conference that was started by Patrick Wardle, and he's a very, very skilled, highly known, highly renowned Mac OS researcher. And this all started, like I said, when I first started getting into Mac OS research and malware analysis. It actually started with a coworker of mine, Jimmy. He contacted me over Slack one day. It was in the evening, and he said he's a home brewer. And he said, hey, I was looking up this recipe for a double bock, and the site redirected me to this thing that wants me to install an Adobe Flash update. And so this is pretty sketchy. And so I visited the site, ended up getting the redirect, and was able to download the payload, analyze it. And I hadn't seen it before. It turns out it was a very common adware called Schlayer, but it really piqued my interest. And so I did some analysis on it and ended up collaborating with my friend Josh Watson, who's pictured there in our talk. And we basically I had dissected the malware. He's a Binary Ninja expert. So Binary Ninja is a reverse engineering platform, if you're not familiar with it. And our discussions actually led him to develop a plugin for Binary Ninja to analyze Mac software, which wasn't in there in the product. So we ended up going to Monaco to present this, but my husband Tracy came with me, and we decided that, if we're going all the way overseas, we might as well kind of extend this into a sort of vacation. So we decided to stop down in Lyon on our way to Monaco for a few days, and it was great. We had, it's always been on my bucket list to go to a Michelin star restaurant. So we had a fantastic meal at this 2 or 3 star Michelin restaurant there. And then we headed down to the conference, and the conference was just energizing. I had been to the first one. I had the opportunity to speak the second one. It's a very small group, so very closely knit, and under 100, I think it was around 100 attendees. So you really had time to get to know and actually have deep conversations with people. And I'd actually picked up a friend of mine in Baltimore, is a high level, she works basically in biotech, and she had done she had been invited to do a huge conference in China, and had given me this phone that somebody had chased her down in the airport to hand her this iPhone. And so we were talking to her when we were in Baltimore for BSides, and I said, you do not use that phone. And she ended up giving it to me, and I brought it with me to the conference. And so a group of us were just tearing it apart. And of course, it was an Android phone that was masked to be an iPhone. But it was just really fun to collaborate with a bunch of people in person from all over the world, and to be able to share this knowledge and just have fun with it, So the conference was awesome. I always come off those with a high. It's like, all this new information and things that you want to explore. So we leave the conference and decide to head to Marseille. We had decided to go to Marseille for a couple days, head to Burgundy, and then finally back to Paris to fly out. So on our way to Marseille, so from the conference, it was almost Tracy's birthday. And so I decided that we decided to take a helicopter ride. You can actually take a helicopter from Monaco directly to Nice, and it drops you off in the airport in the actual terminal. So you don't even have to go through security or anything like that. And it was fantastic. Neither of us had been on a helicopter before. We were sitting right in the cockpit, right next to the pilot. It was great. So we decided we had taken trains from there on, but we found out that apparently you have to book trains ahead of time because they do actually sell out the train tickets. But we had such a good time driving from Lyon to Monaco that we decided to just drive to Marseille and go along the coast. Absolutely beautiful, south of France, along the coast. But then we were on our way to Marseille, and we decided to just impulsively stop off at this kind of overlook tourist site. And this happened. So we were gone from the car for exactly 7 minutes. I only know this because I had taken pictures at the car before I walked out to the overlook. And when I returned, I took this picture, and the time that had elapsed was 7 minutes. In that time, the thieves had taken 3 bags, our 2 computer bags, nearly $10,000 in various equipment and dongles and computer, everything, including both of our passports and my wallet, which I had left in the car because we were just walking out to take a couple pictures and coming back. So not only was this extraordinarily inconvenient because we're in the middle of nowhere in France, there's no police station nearby. The closest station was an hour away. Luckily, there was a guy that came out into the parking lot who happened to speak English and was able to tell us there's no 911. And there is a number to call, but we had no idea how to find that. But luckily, this guy came out and he spoke English. He told us what number to call. Of course, the nearest police station, nobody there speaks English. So he actually communicated to them what had happened, and they told us that we needed to come to this police station in Fréjus, which is a very small town. So we head with, there's glass all over the front seat. Completely, I can't sit in the front seat. My phone is dying. So I'm in the back seat with no seatbelt. Tracy is driving an hour to this place in Fréjus. I'm leaning through the front seat. Luckily, they hadn't taken my phone charger. There was one that was plugged in. That was the only saving grace there. But so we get to the station in Fréjus, and of course, nobody speaks English. But we got enough information through that they actually sent a forensic analyst out, which I was shocked. I mean, this is this small town police station. They sent a forensic analyst out who was dusting for fingerprints, taking all this information. And so they took all this information, but they said, we can't really do anything with this. You're going to have to go to like Marseille and try to file a complaint with them, but we'll send all this information over. So we head to Marseille, where we were supposed to drop off this rental car as well. And obviously can't leave the rental car alone. And of course, we're very delayed at this point. The time that I'm supposed to drop the rental car off was 6 o'clock or something like that. And by this time, it's after 8. And so I call the rental car company, and they said, it's no problem. They're open until 9. Don't worry about it. As long as you get there by like 8:45, you're fine. Well, we got there at 8:35. And the death stare from the lady, that we couldn't find anybody. Usually here you pull in, there's a rental car, there's a guy that comes and checks you in. There was nobody. So we parked into a space that was marked as the rental car company. And I went into the office, and the woman who was running the counter was absolutely berate. Like she was completely irate. And anyway, I ended up getting a piece of paper from her to report the incident. But we had to just leave the car there with this window broken. And she just didn't seem to care. She said, my intake guy is gone. I was like, well, the window's broken. And she said, well, are the doors locked? And I said, yeah, but the window is completely out. Not knowing, I'm like, is there some sort of translation issue here? But no, she said, are the doors locked? I said, yeah. So anyway, I take pictures, 360 pictures, just in case, because I'm like, this is in a train station in Marseille. The car's going to get stolen or something is going to happen. And I don't want to be responsible for that. But anyway, the short story, we were supposed to go from Marseille, spend a couple days there, and then go to Burgundy for a few days, and then head back to Paris to fly out. But the problem was we had lost our passports. So it's like, well, how are we going to get back out of the country? We need new passports. But the embassy in Marseille was closed indefinitely for whatever reason. And that weekend happened to be, this is Thursday, and that weekend was the 75th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. So the embassy in Paris, which was our closest embassy, was closed on Monday, and we were supposed to fly out first thing Tuesday morning. So needless to say, we cut our trip short and headed straight to Paris. Needless to say, not much of a vacation, although we did enjoy ourselves. And I have to say that +1 for networking, a French researcher that we met at Objective by the Sea completely saved us by basically he said, tell me the entire story, because basically we had both seen there were 4 motorcyclists that were coordinating the robbery, and we had full descriptions of all of them. And so he told us, write up everything that you can think of, every description, and he translated the whole thing into French for us. If we had not had that, the police in Fréjus and in Marseille would not have given us a second thought. They didn't even want to talk to us until I showed them that I had a document in French that they could read. And without that, because we had pictures of our passports on each of our phones, we were able to have the passport numbers, and they were able to give us official documents to take to the embassy. And that sped the process so much. So that's another just tip. If you're ever going overseas or anywhere, have a picture of your passport number. If you're traveling with somebody else, have it on each of your phones. It really saved us. But anyway, getting off the point. After that conference, coming back, obviously stressed out, trying to figure out, what do we do now? We have all these losses. How do we handle that? Can we actually get reimbursed for any of this? And on top of that, there were more conferences, more travel coming up right away. We had, I had the DFRWS in Portland, which is a forensics conference. We had a trip to Florida, which was also supposed to be a vacation, but it was just kind of a weekend over my birthday. And I ended up actually we went on a fishing trip, which was fantastic. But I was sick the entire time on the boat. Spoke at Jailbreak, visited family after Jailbreak. We had BSides NOLA. Ended up going to Hawaii to meet Tracy's family. This was the first time I'd been, and it was just a whirlwind of meeting everybody, which was fantastic, but extremely draining. And again, the work travel. We had two more planning sessions to fly to Boston. So again, so many more unfinished house projects, like our deck pictured here, which was falling apart. We didn't really realize how much until we started ripping it out, which is often the case, but there were rotted boards, everything. And no, it's still not finished. We have about 6 boards put in and some extra joists. And then this is a year later, basically. And I had to get the obligatory cat picture in there. That's Hawkeye. But basically, completely burned out, stressed out. The home projects are piling up. The work projects are piling up because I'm going off and speaking and not doing research this time, and so everything is just becoming more and more of a weight, right? And so they say that when things start to get out of control, we look to to change something that we can control. And so one thing that I did was cut off 12 inches of my hair because that's how I dealt with it. But anyway, so winter came, totally stressed out, physical, mental health, really stressful, really suffering at this point. But then came 2020. So we all know how 2020 has gone. At the beginning, obviously, did not know what was to come. I was asked to do this talk, and I was like, I have so much material already for this talk. I was really excited about it. I had no idea that there was so much worse to come. It started out by getting the flu, or possibly it was actually COVID. Recent research showed that we had infections much earlier than they originally thought. And this was in February. But, overcame that. Still just, really not well, but looking forward to a mini vacation in March. We were going back to Hawaii. And I was really looking forward to actually having like a vacation where things didn't completely go wrong, or I wasn't just stressed out from giving a talk or working or networking and all of those things. So things were looking up, right? So I spoke at the third iteration of Objective by the Sea, which was in Maui. So we had planned to stay with our friend Sarah, who's pictured there in the middle with me. A lot of you probably know her, Sarah Edwards, big Mac forensics guru, I'll call her. But we had a great time. Again, this conference was just energizing, meeting people and really getting time to talk to people in person. And so I ended up speaking at this conference as well. And Tracy actually won an Apple Watch. They had a couple of giveaways at the end of the conference, and neither of us are very lucky about that kind of thing. So that was pretty exciting. But our plans were to leave Maui, and actually Sarah was going to come with us and stay with relatives of Tracy's on Oahu. And we were going to visit his ailing mother and other relatives again. But at this point, COVID was just starting to become an issue. This was mid-March. It wasn't quite at the point where there were travel restrictions to the state, but we decided to keep our plans because it was like, well, it wasn't really clear how serious it was at that point. But just after the conference, things started to turn. So we knew it was serious. We're in Hawaii on Maui. We knew it was serious when there was a shortage of Spam and rice. There was run on Spam and rice. A day before these pictures were taken, those shelves were fully stocked. And we realized at that point that we needed to cancel our plans to visit the relatives in Maui on Oahu because the relatives we were staying with were elderly, and his mother and other family members were high risk, and we couldn't risk exposing them. So what was supposed to become a vacation for a week became a mad rush to try to find new housing because we were stuck there. We couldn't get immediate flights out. And so Tracy and Sarah and I are trying to find new flights. Sarah had to give a talk or give a class for SANS in San Francisco. So we're trying to find new hotels and trying to get flights out. It was crazy. We tried to enjoy it, but it was mostly just trying to figure out how we were going to get out. And they'd even closed the parks and the beaches the day before we left. And then they ended up closing the island completely to tourists the day we flew out. So nobody was allowed in. And actually the day we left, there were protesters right outside the airport that were holding signs saying, you know, tourists go home, you're not welcome here, and demanding the borders be closed. So needless to say, that was not the best vacation ever either. So once we got home, our town, we live up in Longmont, it was near lockdown. We hadn't stocked supplies because we'd been gone for 2 weeks and we really didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't think it was that as serious as it was. And we joked about running out of toilet paper. But with 3 of the 4 of us, Tracy's daughters, at high risk, we decided it made more sense for them to come stay with us so we could minimize trips to the store, because at that time they were limiting to once a week and share meals. And I definitely sympathize with parents. I can't imagine having to work from home and homeschool or provide childcare 24/7. It's bad enough, as I can say, 4 adults suddenly living together 24/7 wasn't easy either, and certainly added to the stress. So suddenly I'm making masks, and you can see that I had 2 very competent helpers in that, and attempting sourdough, which eventually did work out, but obviously failed a few times. But my role at work had changed, and I was taking on a lot more work than I could handle for even a normal climate, not even with the stress of COVID. So I was overcommitted, stressed out, literally physically and mentally suffering. And I tried to push through, but you know, the next couple of months, it just seemed like my efforts went nowhere. So this leads to the final face down moment for me. The terminology was the face down moment was kind of another concept that I stole from Brene Brown. But as you can see here, this is another scene from Silicon Valley where Richard, you know, trying to do a startup, he'd failed and recovered several times, but had reached the height of a failure that he just felt he couldn't return from and was literally just on the floor. And for me, this moment was like realization of the fact there was no way that I could recover from my current position. In their eyes, I had completely failed the tasks that I had been given despite my efforts. And, you know, to me, I had been really working my butt off trying to get this stuff done. But then shame completely overwhelmed me because I had never had anything but positive response to my work and praise. And to be told that you failed and you're not good enough, and that was just, I was left completely powerless. I didn't know what to do. But then, you know, I realized I needed to pick myself back up somehow and dig myself out of this hole and step back and reevaluate. And I got angry. This turned into anger for my critics. You know, I thought again about Roosevelt's quote and realized that I was putting way too much stock in the opinions of people who didn't know or understand my work and who didn't even know me or the hard work that I'd put into the company over 2.5 years. Some of these people hadn't even been there that long. So I took a step back to reevaluate. And that is where we are now, the reconciliation. So I can't say that my failure was a case of pre-greatness. Obviously, I'm not some sort of successful entrepreneur right now. But I came away from this with a clear vision of what's important to me in my life, both personally and in my career, and realized that there are far too many times when I've said yes for the wrong reasons, either to make somebody happy or to fill a gap that nobody else wanted to volunteer for. And so I raised my hand. And that's gotten me into trouble more times than I can say. But again, going back to this Brene Brown, in one of her books, I thought this was really appropriate. She said the opposite of failure is not necessarily success, but reconciliation. So aligning our past with an expanded vision that has just come into view. So you can't look at failure and say, well, I didn't really, have some new product. I didn't succeed in the way that a Steve Jobs had. But you have to step back and say, how was this a success for me? And for me, it was taking a step back and realizing that, I had been doing a lot of things wrong for myself personally and for others. In doing things the wrong way for myself, it was affecting my work, my personal commitments, and that's not just a injustice for me, but it was also affecting others. So, I was stubborn. I really didn't want to put bullet points slides in this deck. It's hard, but I did want to just kind of end with some key points. I was too stubborn to admit that I needed help and realize that I needed help. I was ashamed once I realized that I was too far down, that I had fallen so far that I felt like I couldn't ask for help anymore, or admit that I had overcommitted, or admit that I was uncomfortable with the work that I was given. It was too late. I didn't recognize when I needed help physically, mentally, professionally, and I was afraid to ask for it for fear of sounding inadequate or unqualified. And, again comes this perfectionism thing. And you don't have to be a perfectionist to be have a fear of failure that's basically the same thing, that tells you you're not good enough. And this causes, again, a failure to produce for fear of judgment that it's not good enough from somebody else, or just shame in not feeling like you've produced something that's up to your standards. And then again, fear of failure can be worse than actually just trying something, trying that moonshot and failing at it. But you have to know your critics. If you do try for the moon and fail, who are the people that are judging you on that? Are they worth your consideration? And your inner critic is worse than any other. We talk to ourselves more harshly than we would ever talk to a colleague or a friend. You would never tell a friend or colleague who's struggling and coming to you for help the things that you would tell yourself when you're in a shame spiral and feeling like you're not good enough. And finally, vulnerability is not weakness. You have to be able to open yourself up to ask for help and know the people that you can trust to ask for that help. And again, I've taken the last month to try to step back, relax, reflect, and look at where I've been and where I want to be. This is the first time since college that I've actually taken a break between jobs and exploring different roles, different companies, trying to figure out, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? Who do I want to work with? And I'm still recovering from the physical effects of the stress, but it's it's been a very helpful experience for me. And don't get me wrong, I still stress out about every interview, suffer imposter syndrome like most of us, or everyone I know. Everyone I talk to, I feel like is smarter or more experienced. But now I know that blanking on a question that I kick myself over after in an interview, it's not the end of the world. It's hard and it's never going to get any easier, but I have to keep reminding myself that you have to take time and, remind yourself to know your limits, know when to ask for help and who to ask for help. Find the help that you need and lean on your support system. You can't bury yourself in your head because that inner critic is always going to take you down. And you have to take time to disconnect. You know, I thought I was taking vacation, but almost every vacation I took that was of any length of time, more than a day or so, I was still connected to work. I was still feeling guilty for not getting stuff done. You have to take time and just back off. Don't listen to Slack. Don't, turn off your notifications. Don't look at your email and network. Making new friends, like I said, I'm really hoping that some of you contribute to that thread or at least read it and maybe make new connections that have similar experiences to you. And maybe you can make a new connection who will help you out and maybe you can help them out. And I know I'm still going to fail at all of these things again and again. But the more you fail and the more you back out and recognize these recurring habits, you can try to at least recognize the things when you need help. And then when you build a good network, friends, family, coworkers, random people on Twitter who you may not have even met, these people are all in your support system, and you have to know when you can lean on those people. So that's the message that I want to leave with you is know yourself, listen to yourself. Don't listen to those critics whose opinion is not worth your suffering. So thank you. And please feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm on Twitter, Guttershirl. If you Google me, you can find me everywhere. Please feel free to reach out anytime.
Well, thank you, Erika. That was a great talk. That's an important thing to discuss. I think we might have, there was one question that we could try to do really quick. We'll be switching over to the next session at 10:30. The question was from Aaron Ott. Erika, thank you so much for bringing up the word fear. I do find myself procrastinating quite a bit for that very reason. What have you found is a good way to get past that?
For me, actually, one of the best things was the Pomodoro method. I don't know if some of you have heard of that, but basically I have a timer. So I have a Mac. There's an app called Be Focused. And literally the theory is you work for X amount of time, you take a 5-minute break. And then after 4 of these increments, then you take a longer break, like a 20-minute break. And I found that it actually helped me focus on, okay, this is my task for right now, and I'm just gonna hit it with everything I have for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, however you have it set. And I found that when I actually focus on that, it's easier to block everything out and look forward to when I can take the break and kind of just dive into something without having to overthink it too much and kind of not focus on that fear of not being able to do it. Just here's a time slot and I'm just going to hit it with whatever I have.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, thank you again for the talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot.